Mr. Toastmaster, there were two brothers who were fraternal twins and raised by a verbally and physically abusive father. The father was a violent drug addict who, when the boys were 12, eventually ended up killing a liquor store clerk in a botched robbery and spent the rest of his life in prison. The man's two sons grew to be quite different men. One became a man very much like his father, and he too spent a significant amount of his life going in and out of rehab, jail, and prison. The other son earned a graduate degree in business from a prestigious university. He was happily married. He earned a six-figure income, and he was an executive with a major Fortune 500 company. When researchers later asked the brothers separately why their lives had turned out as they had, interestingly, they both gave the same answer. With a father like mine, how could I have been any different? Two women reached the age of 70. One believed that at 70, the body begins breaking down and that her only future was one of a steady physical decline, terminating at last in the grave. She began preparing herself financially and psychologically for her anticipated demise. It was as though mentally she was sitting in the foyer of a funeral home, waiting for the undertaker to call, "Next!" The other woman believed that reaching age 70 was an opportunity to start a new chapter in life. She felt that a person's capabilities at any age were limited by two things: their attitude and their willingness to try new things. She had always wanted to learn something about mountaineering, and learn she did. And over the next 25 years, she was able to climb numerous challenging peaks around the world, and in her 90s, the woman, Hulda Crooks, became the oldest woman to have ever completed the climb of Mount Fuji in Japan. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years, his friends were very concerned with how he would adapt to this newfound freedom. When Mandela was later asked about how he felt upon his release, he confessed that at first he was overwhelmed with frustration and anger and had an almost overpowering thirst for revenge. At this deep point in despair, he said that it was as though God gave him a divine insight and reminded him that even though he had been in prison for 27 years, they had never broken his spirit. He felt that this insight was what gave him the ability to work so hard toward the eventual reconciliation of the races in South Africa. There is a common thread in these three stories. In the first story, the two brothers faced the same negative events, but they each interpreted them differently, with consequent different outcomes. The two women faced a similar situation. Again, a different interpretation with a different outcome. And in the third story, Nelson Mandela willed himself to change his interpretation of the adverse events in his life. What these stories illustrate is that we are not helpless victims of circumstance, nor does our past have to equal our future. If we're victims at all, we are victims of our interpretation of adverse events. An event plus our response equals an outcome. Whether that outcome is positive or negative depends upon that response. As rational human beings, all of us have the ability to choose how we respond to any event. Hopefully, we choose wisely. All of us have the ability to objectively observe and thus control our thoughts, our emotions, and most of our physical reactions. Our thoughts control our feelings about any given event, but we control our thoughts. Therefore, we can control our response to events. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Whatever does not kill me makes me stronger. How will you choose to interpret the adverse events in your life? Will you allow them to strengthen you or drive you to despair? After all, most of our happiness and satisfaction in life is a direct result of our response choices. I'll always remember something my grandmother said to me when I was a small child. She said, "Son, every now and again, life will hand you lemons. But a wise person uses those lemons and makes lemonade." Mr. President.